Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and for those of you that don't keep track of the community tab on my channel, this past Thursday I guest starred on the Shattered Shard D&D livestream, and I will be continuing my role as Administrator Barial for one more day this coming Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time over on Rachel Messer's channel, and a link to that will be in the pinned comment down below. It is a group comprised of voice actors and internet personalities, so do me a favor and come lend me your eyeballs and ears. It is a 2-hour broadcast, not your normal 4 to 4.5 hours, and I hope to see you there. That said, Ubisoft's Yves Guillemot recently woke up one morning and chose stupidity yet again in a recent investor call surrounding the upcoming release of the game Skull and Bones. Now, Skull and Bones is a live service game that Ubisoft is choosing to release at a full $60 asking price, which asking AAA release prices for a live services title is, well, it's quite bold to be certain, but bold as that may be, it's not certainly as bold as the statement made by Yves Guillemot during that investor call, where he said in response to an investor asking if a free-to-play model might be better suited for a live services game model and mechanics, "You will see that Skull and Bones is a fully fledged game," he said. "It's a very big game, and we feel that people will really see how vast and complete that game is. It's a really full Quadruple A game that will deliver in the long run." Now, you've all heard the phrase word salad before, and most of you know what that means. It is when a person strings together a large number of words that ultimately says and means nothing whatsoever. The largest part of that is the claim that Skull and Bones is, quote, Quadruple A, which is complete nonsense terminology in and of itself, but we can take it to mean that Skull and Bones is so good that it transcends AAA, which again is a very bold statement indeed.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now, there are certain things that one can, or rather at least should, expect with a big budget release. Good graphics, while not required, certainly don't hinder a game, and it has somewhat come to be expected from large corporate game developers and publishers. Companies who tend to treat bleeding-edge graphical fidelity as a baseline requirement, even to the extent of that desire for high-end graphical fidelity coming at the expense of gameplay, and will, at least on console, tend to throttle frames per second and offer them up as a sacrifice to the graphical gods. A big story is another aspect of big-budget games. This, however, has become something of an afterthought, and is by no means anywhere near as common in the AAA industry as it used to be. Engaging gameplay mechanics are another hallmark of what can, or at least should, expect within big-budget titles. The game can be as flashy as you want and have a moving, compelling, or exciting story that can leave one as satisfied as reading a well-written novel, but if the gameplay isn't there, then the game developers have chosen poorly in life, and so have those that purchased it. And there are many other smaller aspects of a big-budget title that should be expected, especially when paying the full $60 industry current asking price for a game, such as a large amount of playability, as well as potential replayability. Character and control customization, unless you're playing a game like The Witcher where you're not playing an avatar, you're playing a or the character from a story, and in general a certain level of polish to the game, something that has been a notable lack thereof, especially in the past several years with AAA titles. But taking such things into account, how does Skull and Bones stack up both as a AAA title and as a, quote, Quadruple A? Well, thankfully Ubisoft was brave, or I should say foolish enough, to provide an open beta for the game prior to its upcoming release on the 16th of this month. And me being me, I chose to sit down and take a couple of hours with this first ever in the world Quadruple A game to see just how impressive, innovative, and groundbreaking such a game must certainly be if Yves Guillemot was willing to so casually throw around terminology that will lead people to believe that this game will rise to new heights within the realms of video games as a Quadruple A title that will set the standard for what this new Quadruple A standard will come to be. Also, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button for me real quick, like the video, and drop a comment. Let me know what you think of Skull and Bones after watching my critique of the open beta. Is it Quadruple A, as Yves Guillemot claims, minimum viable for a free-to-play snooze fest, or somewhere in between? Also, it would help greatly if you share this video around on Discord, social media, Reddit, and other places. I've been fighting to get back into making regular content, and any help you can provide would be greatly appreciated. Now, with any such review, as I've always done in the past, I will start as one always should with the options menu. After all, if care isn't taken with that aspect, then one should really not expect care to be taken with the rest of the game. And in that regard, we have pretty much everything that Ubisoft usually includes within their options menu with most of their games. A fairly well-rounded list of accessibility options for those that might require them is included as well. However, outside of the colorblind presets, most of those accessibility options only show up when you first load into the game, and once you move past that screen, the accessibility options do not show up under the options menu itself, which is an oversight which can make things a tad more difficult for anyone who accidentally chose the wrong settings, so something to be aware of. Other than that, the game does support full rebindability for your control schemes, along with all of the standard items one should expect from the language, audio, visual, graphics, and interface categories. So moving on from the options menu into the game itself, what is Skull and Bones about? Well, put simply, you are a pirate! The game is no more complex than that with your motivations and what you're going to be doing. The game introduces you to the world that is set in the Indian Ocean in the 17th century, where, at least for the tutorial portion, you are a crewman on a pirate ship running escort for the now destroyed Exeter and her captain, the pirate Wrastler. From there, the game introduces you to the mechanics, which equate to little more than piloting your ship and firing your cannons. Now, one thing I will say here is that they did at least take care to include ranging and distance with your cannons, so your reticle is zeroed for a specific range, and you will need to adjust your aim higher or lower based on distance, so there is at least a little skill involved. But after that introduction, you finally come across the character creation and customization option for who you will be playing as, and I have to say, the options here are not exactly what I would call robust. Now, certainly not groundbreaking enough to call Quadruple A here. The game offers you a few presets as baseline templates to then build off of, but the selections for customization are highly limited. Even when selecting the body type, you only get the vaguest idea of which of the 4 body types you're selecting because the game only shows you your character from the shoulders up until after you've decided on your customization choices. It's extremely limited, and I suspect that is partly due to the live services model of the game, where greater customization choices might well be locked behind a paywall. Now, normally this is the part of a review where I would talk about the story a little bit, but within this game, the entire story can be summed up as, you are a pirate! Now, that's all there is to it. The primary dialogue through NPCs within the first 2 hours of gameplay focuses entirely on vendors within the pirate port of St. Anne and the kingpin of St. Anne, Captain Scurlock, where the story itself boiled down to earning enough renown to either become Scurlock's partner or his rival. So the story of the game is, suffice to say, essentially non-existent. In fact, the 2004 game Sid Meier's Pirates actually did a far better job of including a story, and it had, surprisingly enough, more robust overall game mechanics than this live service Quadruple A title. In terms of game mechanics, let me show you what the game's open beta had to offer. There is shooting pirates with your cannons. Yes, we all know that a game about ships and the like would have to have that, but what else is there? Can you board ships and fight the crews? Well, yes and no. You can board the ships, but there is no combat within the game outside of your ship. No direct combat between ship captains with everything on the line. No managing numbers of crew and seasoned and trained boarding teams to take ships captive or anything like that. You get the option within the game to throw your lines on a ship either by reducing its health sufficiently or by shooting the glowing red bits on the ship, which also does critical hit damage to the vessels themselves. But once you do that, you pull the enemy vessel next to yours and then that's it. The opposing ship essentially explodes and you're able to loot the resources. Now, you do get additional resources than you otherwise would have had you simply sunken the vessel with your cannons, but that's about it. One other thing you can do is sack settlements for loot as well. This mechanic is about as robust as the rest of the game, however. You pull up and choose to plunder the settlement, where you get a brief clip of some of your crew jumping off your ship to go fight. You're then greeted by a progress meter with 4 levels at the top of your screen, which slowly fills over time, and as that progress meter fills, the faction that owns the settlement will send ships to engage you. But this, at least at the early level that I was at, was extremely basic. I literally had my ship parked and unmoving the entire time the settlement pillage was occurring, and I was perfectly fine. But do you yourself get to pillage the towns or combat its defenders in search of wealth and riches? No, not in the slightest. And that is where this game really suffers. Yes, you have ship combat, but that is all you have. In terms of gameplay potential, Skull and Bones is extremely lacking in almost every respect. It is, by its very definition, a live services title, but I can't even critique the live services mechanics here as they are quite notably absent from the game's open beta. A choice that companies like Ubisoft consciously make with such things, as well as provided review codes for their games, in a direct effort to prevent the monetization schemes from being publicized and critiqued before gamers purchase the game themselves. Now, I did notice that the game has a tiered system for its ships ranging from 1 to 6, and my educated opinion on how this will work, having seen other games with similar tier systems, tells me that only some of the standard Tier 6 vessels, as well as a few Tier 5s, can be earned through gameplay, whereas the higher-end Tier 5s, as well as many of the Tier 6s, as well as any premium Tier 6s, would only be able to be obtained through direct purchase. Also, let's talk about graphics. Now, good graphics do not a great game make, but taking that into account, the graphics for the game aren't bad. They certainly aren't bleeding edge, and they're certainly not bleeding edge enough to rise into that Quadruple A fantasy that Yves Guillemot has, but they are decent and serviceable enough. As for the game's stability, I encountered no real bugs or glitches, but bear in mind I did only spend a couple of hours with Skulls and Bones, so your mileage most certainly will vary in that regard. Also, while I do have an NVIDIA 4080, my CPU is rather long in the tooth. It is an i7-8700K. But even with that, granted with DLSS enabled, the game was running at an average of 85 frames per second for me, rarely dipped below 70, and only twice did it dip below 50, and even then, only very briefly. So the game's stability does seem to be relatively consistent. Now, ultimately, Skull and Bones is a live services game, which means it is there to bleed your wallet dry, while at the same time asking full AAA price for what is ultimately a bland and shallow experience all the while. No real story to speak of, extremely limited gameplay mechanics, poor character customization, and the live services scheme thrown on top of it makes for a game that may be as large as the Indian Ocean it takes place in, but is as shallow as a half-evaporated mud puddle. And because of that, I could not recommend this game to anyone. Even if the game were free to play, the gameplay mechanics are nowhere near as robust as needed to support long-term gameplay. The Skull and Bones doesn't even deserve the title AAA and only has that title owing to the size of the company that developed it. But Quadruple A, it most certainly is not. Granted, Quadruple A is not a thing, nor will it ever be. Skull and Bones went through development hell and was even scrapped and redone at one point, and it very clearly shows. It is not worth your time, it most certainly is not worth your money, and Yves Guillemot is delusional to think this game transcends AAA. If anything, it epitomizes the current trends of the AAA games industry, which is do the least amount of work for the most money. And Skull and Bones certainly fits the bill in terms of least amount of work. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.